Thank you very much. Welcome to the next session. First of all, I apologize. Rebecca Todd, far right, as you look at her, has COVID and not feeling great, and apologies, she is not here today. My name's David Marks from Brockton Everlast. I wanted to introduce very briefly the four panelists. On your far left, Mike Anstey, Dr. Mike Anstey. He's told me he has a PhD in biology. That's right. From Cambridge Innovation Capital, which is, correct me if I'm wrong, Mike, around about a £500 million AUM investor in early stage companies, specifically coming out of Cambridge University's partnerships with both faculty, research fellows, and students. And you're based in Cambridge. Investing across a range of technologies, both life science and tech. Next, James Shepherd from Cadans. 23 campuses.
Sorry, that's James.
Oh, excuse me. Sorry.
Apologies. We flipped ourselves, I think.
I was just making sure you had a coffee. Thomas Wren from Breakthrough Properties, apologies, which is a joint venture between Tishman Speyer Properties and Belco. Investing in life science campuses and development across both North America and Europe.
That's correct.
I definitely won't get Abby Shapiro wrong, who I've joint ventured with in the past. Abby is head of office, retail, and life science at Oxford Properties, which is the real estate investment and development arm of OMERS, the public pension plan from Ontario, Canada. And lastly, James Shepherd from Cadans. James, I think it's 23 campuses that Cadans...
23 campuses, 7 countries, growing every day.
Growing specifically across life science. So I guess the first question, which I don't think has been mentioned today, which is to talk about the slowdown in venture funding potentially. Certainly the pullback in the NASDAQ. The NASDAQ is down 31% year to date. It masks a huge range of performance from companies with some stocks that we'd be very familiar with, down 70, 80% from their peak. Facebook down 50% plus, or Meta down 50% plus. So if the conventional wisdom is that venture funding leads to startup backing, which leads to the anticipation of job growth, which leads to space requirements in the real estate sector, which leads to more confidence for development. I guess the first question for my panelists is what's been going on in the capital markets, potentially reversing a lot of this, and is this an opportunity or a threat as it relates to the UK specifically? I guess if we look at that food chain and that cascade, we should start with you, Mike, as an investor.
Yeah, happy to comment on that. So this has been nothing less than an exciting year so far when we think about the impact of the capital markets on venture funding and therefore how startups are thinking about their future. Last year, 2021 was, as we all know, a spectacular year, and we set records. So the UK had something like $18 billion or pounds of venture investment, which was a doubling from 2020. So last year, phenomenal. And the UK is the largest center for venture investment in Europe. And so we maintain our leadership in Europe for venture investment. The bulk of that happens in London. And then the second step outside of London is in Oxford and Cambridge. And what we're seeing now a dramatic slowdown from what happened in 2021, which was literally pedal to the metal, deploy capital as fast as you can into these early stage growth companies. Now investors, not surprisingly, are being a little bit more cautious, a little bit more selective, a little bit more, I would say, balanced in how we're going to deploy capital in this year. And I think this may go on for longer than we may think. The implications, of course, as you alluded to, will be, well, what happens to demand in lab space, and how does that trickle down? And I think also, how do we think about foreign investment coming into these early stage businesses? And when you look at venture-backed companies, the really successful ones, the ones that go and raise the £50 million, £100 million rounds, all of those, with very few exceptions, have foreign investors coming in, many from the US. And foreign investors will be dealing with their own problems at home right now, and I think you may see them less keen to come and venture into the UK and other markets. So we're going to be having a lot of consequences to this. I think the good news is that this could be an opportunity to really take stock, build out lab space, build up much needed lab space. There's such demand right now, with even in a slowing of venture investment in the next 12 months, we won't meet the requirements of companies today, let alone the ones that are going to keep on coming.
Thank you. Thomas, your view?
Yeah, I think, to build on the point there, obviously there's a bear run on life sciences at the moment in the US, and I don't think we've seen that trickle across yet into venture capital in the UK. Q1 was still highest on record in life sciences, about 450 million raised, but public markets has been a massive slowdown. Q1 was around 30 million invested in UK life sciences, and there's that lack of liquidity there. The liquidity option is going to create, some caution in the companies and their expansion plans, and they're going to have to think about, where they focus their energy and their cash. So cash preservation, I think, is going to be key for a lot of companies over the next 12 months. But there is a lot of pent-up demand. So, in all of those markets, whether it's Oxford, Cambridge, London, or more broadly across the UK, there is a supply-demand imbalance, and I think that's what the three of us are all, trying to address. But patience is probably going to pay the day. But fundamentals of science haven't changed as a result of this, macro play. The science is there, the quality is there to be invested behind. It's just, liquidity options. And it's very much a story of two halves as well, because pharma's never had more cash on its books. So they're going to be more acquisitive. They've still got, interesting requirements globally. So they might drive some of that leasing kind of void that we see, probably coming from some of the earlier stage companies. So there's a lot to be hopeful for, but I think, investors and developers alike need to tread carefully through the next 9, 12 months, or, to take your comment, maybe it's going to last longer, and maybe we should, prepare for that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Abby, my understanding is elsewhere within OMERS, within the wider parent group of Oxford, there is significant investment in life science through venture funding and your debt teams. Is Oxford and OMERS of the same view that this is either an opportunity or a threat as it relates to further expansion of life science?
Yeah, I would generally share the kind of sentiment that that Mike and Tom just said. I think a couple of things that we would say is we do fundamentally believe that the underlying trend is still there. I think long term, there is all of the things that we've always been having high conviction on with regards to the sector in terms of aging population, technology driving new innovation from a healthcare perspective, how are we productive as citizens longer? I think that all is all there still, plus layering on top of that for certain markets, a acute supply-demand imbalance. So we've got no concerns from the long-term perspective. I think this is really just a function of what's going to happen from an investment market standpoint. And maybe, there's going to be some short-term hit on the occupational demand as occupiers, similar to what we've seen during COVID, candidly, which is just kind of saying, unless we absolutely have to rush, we're probably going to be a little bit more patient around thinking through that expansion plan and creating optionality for ourselves accordingly. And I think, I think patience right now is not going to be a bad thing for most investors, just to kind of, let's just take stock of what we've got. We're in a great position now. We've done some great acquisitions across Europe. We've got a lot to digest. We're very happy to kind of continue to kind of work through that product, which will come on board over the next, call it 2 to 4 years, where we probably are feeling a lot more optimistic that some of these short-term trends should hopefully kind of have filtered through the system by then.
James, is that similar to your view at Cadence?
Yeah, definitely. I think what we've all said on the panel is completely correct. We're very much of the firm belief that this is something that will be around for the next few years, but if you can get through the next few years, the fundamentals are still completely strong. So if you go back to the beginning, back to where most of the science comes from in academia, you're looking at Oxford, Cambridge as two examples. Those universities have been around a long, long time, doing world-class science for a long, long time, and they will still be around for a long, long time. If you couple that with the fact that the change in narrative in science around moving away from doing science for science sake and getting your big shiny corner office to really demonstrating the impact of the work that you do And now impact is a word that gets used a lot and comes in all different shapes and sizes, but a very tangible way of demonstrating the impact of your work is the creation of a business. Joe blogs on the street understands businesses. So by factoring all of that through, you can see that the top of the funnel, so to speak, is still incredibly strong. And you're seeing more and more invention disclosures from universities across the country. And to talk to the kind of levelling up agenda, you're seeing a little bit more capitals now starting to trickle through to the companies being created in the north of England. You know, the Northern Gritstone venture capital fund's a really good example of that. So actually, it's as a UK perspective, okay, we're in for a rocky few years for lots of different reasons have been discussed, and nobody's mentioned the word inflation yet, but we'll park that for a second. The reality is that we're in a strong place for the future, and if I kind of broaden that out across Europe, we definitely see the same thing across Europe, in the Netherlands and Germany and in France and further afield. So all in, bumpy few years, but we're heading in the right direction.
Thank you. I was on a work study trip to the US a few weeks ago, and one of the things that struck me in San Diego as an example, which is about a 20 million square foot life science lab market, we asked who the largest occupier was in San Diego, and the answer came back, it's Apple at about 2 million feet, and they might double that. As far as we could make out, there was a lot of onshoring going on of chip manufacturing, semiconductor research as a result of geopolitical issues with China. So, you know, in the San Diego market, it's Apple. I was talking to another top 10 North American life science developer who has about a 1 million square foot project on the East Coast, and they said that they were close to pre-leasing it all to one of the FANGs, even though they were designed and built as labs. If you come back here into the UK and you walk around, or cycle around Cambridge Science Park, some of the largest occupiers in and around there, Darktrace, MathWorks, Roku, Microsoft, ostensibly nothing to do with life science. So the question is, in the same way that tech bailed out the London office market post-Brexit, do you see potentially the similar scenario in the Golden Triangle, where actually, notwithstanding the focus of today's on life science, but it's pure old school big tech that is continuing to have the job growth and might well be the largest occupiers in one of these projects that are coming forward, despite the fact that they may be built with capacity for gases and ductwork and dry and wet labs, etc. Do you have a view on whether the
Do you want us to jump in or on
Yeah.
the line? I'll take it first and then let these guys hop in. But you know, I think the tech sector's been going through great strength for the last decade in the UK, and as you say, you know, they've taken great market positions. I think now we're seeing more convergence than ever in the sectors, and you know, life sciences commingling with those in robotics, engineering, and tech, and the benefit of those technologies coming together for scientific solutions. And you know, whether it's CRISPR or mRNA or genomics, they're all driven by, you know, the blend of technology and biology coming together. So, you know, I think tech and life sciences will always have a strong weighting in these. And in San Diego, in that 20 million square foot market you described, you know, last year they leased up 4 million square foot of lab. So it's a huge volume of lab when you think that Oxford is around 1.2 million square feet of lab, you know, built out today. So I think there will be continued hyper growth in some of these markets in the long term in the US, driven by life sciences, but also underpinned because of the technology and the innovation that's built out in those markets. And it's anchoring talent, it's anchoring capital, and the sectors are converging. So I don't think they're interdependent. I think they're becoming kind of commingled and converging more than ever.
I totally agree. Actually, I think it was BAML, but don't quote me on that. It came out with an interesting research publication, I think it was a week or two ago, showing where they've seen kind of exponential growth in terms of population growth and then take up based on different industry sectors. And tech, as we, you know, in Oxford bought into this for a while, tech was obviously one of the big kind of macro sectors that we were buying into in terms of where we were choosing office locations. I think what they've projected out kind of looking forward is that tech is going to continue to actually outpace life science job growth, as well as then take up for office space or any space. So I think tech is one of the fundamental undertones of what is driving life sciences. So I think you have to I agree with you completely. It's a kind of convergence of tech with lots of different industries, and life sciences is one of them.
I think maybe just to add a slightly different point, I completely agree with what Tom and Abby has said. But also as a point, you need as a developer to make a decision. Are you building a lab or are you building an office? Because they're not the same thing. And specifically talking from kind of an operational perspective, how you operate these spaces, and fundamentally how you keep them safe, because they're dangerous places should you get them wrong. And then from a developer perspective, you have to build an operational team, you have to build everything around that. So at some point, you need to make that kind of conviction of, right, we're building a lab because we need to do X, Y, Z that's not an office. And once you kind of go down that office route, it's generally not that easy to kind of go back, or vice versa. So if you make that conviction, it's then when you're approached by your Apples of the world saying, yeah, we'll take your whole building, as a developer, you need to have quite a strong stomach to turn around and go, no, this building wasn't designed for you. And we've certainly seen that with some of our projects. In King's Cross, for example, we had one tech company that came to us and said, we'll take the whole building. We said, no, that's not what we're designing. Because ultimately, if we get into this sort of spiral of continuing to create buildings that are super flexible, and this is not a criticism of anybody, and just leasing them out to tech companies, then where's all of that lab demand going to go that we've all mentioned, that we all see? We as developers have to kind of put our hand up occasionally and go, no, we need to build a different product for a different type of business to satisfy all of the demand that you've heard about all morning. So yeah, as a developer, that's a difficult thing to do, because you've got investors and debt funders sat behind you going, oh my God, I could have just had Apple's covenant on my... And I have to sit there going, no, that's not the building I designed for them. So haven't been sacked yet, but we'll keep going.
But we're going to call it, you've got conviction on the sector that you'll still achieve the same level of return if you're patient and wait for the right occupier.
Thank you, Abby. Yeah. So yeah, you have to kind of keep going and stick to your convictions.
Yeah.
Just if I can react, it's interesting to hear how you guys think about these sorts of things. In the UK, one of the areas that we are truly world-class at, which I can say without any lack of confidence, is life sciences and biomedical research. Right? That is one of our core strengths as a country. And that is effectively being translated into startup companies and scale-up companies and established companies. And I think the UK has a much better chance of building the next $20 billion life sciences company than we do a tech company. So I think the next Genentech or the next Amgen could actually be built in the UK, probably from the Golden Triangle. So although I invest in the company side of things, if I had any extra money, I'd be plowing my money into lab space. Right? Lab space to me is the right investment for us to make, because there's so much demand. We're creating fantastic companies. If we can get enough capital to really back these companies and have them scale, the numbers that we're thinking about lab space right now are missing an order of magnitude on that. So I really, really hope we can get behind what UK's potentially leading industry is, which is the life sciences biotech space.
Yeah.
And not be worried about having the Apples and the others on what was the word you used, like the banners or such of your deals.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point, Mike, because there was a lady earlier today from ARM who was on the stage, and I think ARM is almost, for I think a lot of people, symbolic of what's going on between the tug of war between North America and the UK right now for innovation innovation companies listing on the public markets. Yeah. A couple of months ago, Martin Sorrell described the FTSE 100, as a Jurassic index. Notwithstanding the run-up in, oil and gas companies post-Ukraine, you look down that FTSE 100 list and you don't see the Genentechs and the Amgens, etc. So, notwithstanding, the very positive comments you made about the UK's place in innovation and research, do you feel like we have the depth and strength in the capital markets? Frankly, just being very blunt, the PE multiples in the NASDAQ versus the UK to enable these companies to go all the way and list and be FTSE 100 constituents, tax-paying entities in this, in the UK.
So ARM is a phenomenal story in my mind, and that came out of Cambridge, and that was an example of this incredible moment in time where Acorn Computers and other technologies all came together to create this fantastic company, which has taken a long time to build. And yes, there's constraints on capital markets, and yes, there's a discussion around that, but we need to build a couple more ARMs in the UK, and I would say that now is the time that the next ARM will be a life sciences company. It won't be a semiconductor company. It won't be a tech company. It'll be a life sciences company, because the things that came together at that moment in time to make ARM successful are happening right now in the life sciences space. So that's where I would place a bet and where I am placing bets. I don't think we'll, in the short term, be able to solve the public markets issues, but for great companies, there's money available. Mm-hmm. And so if we can create another ARM, and I think we can, then we should focus on that and not worry about trying to fix the LSE, or not worry about, do we list on NASDAQ or do we list on the London Exchange? Because that feels like it feels like the wrong conversation.
Mm-hmm. But I guess, yeah, to your point, you look at last year, the two companies that went, one to NASDAQ, one to the FTSE. You had Vasitech and Nanopore, becoming unicorn companies with great private rounds and great public rounds in a stellar 2021. And so, as you say, getting behind those companies and watching them succeed and watching them, hopefully stay sticky in their market and actually build out their teams there, as opposed to, splitting across markets, as so often we've seen the case where, built in the UK, but then sort of a lot of operations moving to US. And I think that's right that certain elements of the companies go into those markets, but we've seen a significant displacement of energy and investment going into the US markets for some great UK science.
Yeah, I might almost argue, and Mike, you might course correct me, so feel free to call me out, but I think capital is easier to move across locations, geographies. So you can still have great operations in the UK and list on the NASDAQ or in any other market. So that's less of a concern for me. The bigger concern for me, frankly, is the depth of talent, because I think that's the other piece that you hear people leave the UK about, which is just because the scale is so much less here. Plus, you've got immigration policy you've got to be mindful of, is do you have the right scale of talent to be at the size that the NASDAQ is asking you to be when it's giving you that valuation? So I would almost focus the conversation on the talent piece first, and then the capital markets can kind of come and help you in other ways.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to ask a very quick question of the audience now, if it's okay. Is anybody here who directly works for government in any capacity in any of the relevant departments? We're a couple of hundred meters here from House of Commons, Portcullis House, Bays, Department of Health, Treasury, Department of Levelling Up, Housing, Communities. I mean, all the relevant departments that you would think of, who could virtually fall out of their offices and see what's going on here today. Is it? Oh, there is one. Sorry. I'm a consultant to DEFRA. Okay. Thank you. Well, if it's okay.
Two.
Oh, two. Excuse me. So,
I work for UK Science and Technology Facilities Council,
part of Bays.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Well, I guess what I wanted to ask the panel was if you had one or two key messages to government. We saw. We've seen speakers up here today from large pharma, Abcam and AstraZeneca, recently IPO'd, mid-sized biotechs like Oxford Nanopore. We've certainly seen a lot of venture capital and real estate capital. We've seen a lot of academia here. But key messages to government as we think about those magic ingredients that bring it all together. What would be your one or two key asks of government?
Shall I kick off? So I've got a particular hill that I will definitely die on, and it is the NHS is sat on banks of land, acres and acres and acres of land that and I'm pretty sure you will echo this point, would like to get our hands on, and not to take away from them, but to support what the NHS are trying to do, be that clinical innovation zones or anything else that's deemed important to the function of those spaces. And I've said this on panels before and got interesting reactions from some people, but the reality is that those types of clusters that have been alluded to all morning, where you've got academics, businesses and clinicians, they are far more highly functioning than if you're just sat on XYZ park in the middle of nowhere. So if we can find a way to unlock and actually generate revenue and generate income for the government from the NHS land that is there and is available. You only have to walk around hospitals both in London and out of London to find it. I think there's a real opportunity to tick a lot of boxes for not only the government but for the private sector as well, because you've definitely got investors who will be willing and able to start spending capital and supporting the regeneration, if you want to call it that, of NHS campuses.
I think, to build on that, when you go back to where you started on impact, ultimately the sector's there to improve patient outcomes, to, improve quality of life. And the NHS is, as a single pay system is fantastic, globally for trials and for adopting, new technology and experimenting, as it were. In my former sort of jersey at Bruntwood SciTech, we were able to play in that space in Manchester, building out assets on a hospital campus. And the amount of companies that wanted to co-locate because of that sort of triple helix model, it's proven out. The model exists, globally it exists in the UK, and there's great examples of it. And the demand will be there for that. So I'd agree with James, that's certainly a good policy push.
I guess I would add, in addition to probably the human resource element, which I touched on earlier, which I think does need to kind of, and I actually, to be fair, I think the government are trying to address that, so I think that should be acknowledged. I think the other piece is just generally around planning, and I know James and I have certainly talked about this a number of times in different forums, but there is still a disconnect, at least in my mind, between a number of initiatives that the government are trying to achieve with their planning policy, and there's never really an overarching strategic, how do I join this up? If you think about things like enabling life science growth, if you think about things like leveling up, if you think about things like ESG, if you like, and sustainability more generally, that's probably one of the biggest headaches that I think we probably face as developers in order to meet that demand and enable these companies to grow within the UK. You still have to have a planning framework that enables you to achieve that stock. So that's probably the other element I would add.
I would just suggest that initiatives like the British Business Bank and British Patient Capital are great, and please keep going. We need these to work. And it's a starting point, but the funds under management for BBB and BPC are just not big enough. They need to be an order of magnitude bigger, even more than that, especially as we'll likely see a reduction in foreign investment in the UK over the next 12, 24 months. So that falls on the shoulders of BBB and BPC to really fill that gap. And they're great initiatives, so more of the same, please.
If it's okay, I know I'm supposed to be the moderator and chair of this panel, but as an investor, I wanted to perhaps, I'm not just looking at you two as sole government representatives, but there was work undertaken, I think it was in the Osborne era when he was in the Treasury, to try and merge a lot of the local authority pension funds together and to create much more akin to the kind of Aussie super funds or the big Canadian quasi-sovereign wealth funds that are still technically pension funds, because size really matters, and when the pension funds become large enough, it's pretty proven that they then are able to allocate a certain, up to double-digit percentage of their portfolios into alternative long-term investing, and rather than having the UK reliant on the kindness of strangers, instead of just having the Temaseks and the Mubaдаlas and the GICs investing in long-term infrastructure and science and innovation. We have UK pension funds that are able to do that. I think.
I agree.
It's everything from joined-up thinking on planning. Did you want to make a point? Sorry. Yeah. Is there a
Mike is
oh, it's coming. Thank you.
The local authority pension fund is £328 billion. It is searching for investments that enable net zero, levelling up, and sustainability in that order. And there is a shortage of presentable, investable projects.
Yeah, I mean, that 328 billion would make it one of the largest in the world behind the Japanese post office. So you're aggregating every local authority pension fund, I think, in that.
There are 8 local authority pension funds in that pool. So the largest of the individual ones are, for instance, the Brunel Pension Partnership, which is 35 billion, and Access in East Anglia, which is about 40 billion. Those 2 cover the Oxford to Cambridge arc, and not a single investment proposition has been presented to them.
Right. I can think of a lot of people in this room who could present a number of, of long-term opportunities to them if the planning environment was such that the real estate capital felt like there would be momentum behind joined up thinking. By the way, I'm not picking on you. I'm just and I think it was someone was touching on earlier the potential decision to curtail the arc in favour of levelling up, as if many parts of London, Oxford, Cambridge, and everywhere in between didn't need levelling up itself, is a sort of something that I think a lot of people scratch their heads on. But there's certainly a lot of capital and projects that would make sense.
The role of local authorities here has not been discussed. They control planning consent. They are required to deliver net zero. They are required to deliver biodiversity net gain. Yet nobody today has even mentioned environmental sustainability, apart from the occasional mention of flooding. Why are you not, I say you, I don't mean you personally, why are these immensely valuable investment opportunities not being presented directly to the local authority pension funds who have a legal statutory responsibility to deliver net zero and sustainability?
Yeah, I think it's a very good point. One of the questions that touches on that I had, which was there was a speech made about 10 years or so ago now by the president of New York University, and he was quoting the Democrat Senator Patrick Moynihan, who said 50 years ago, if you want to create a great city, you start a great university and you wait 200 years. And the NYU president said that the same is true today, except the 200 years is now 20. In the race for talent, capital, and innovation, we talk about the long, storied history of Cambridge University, founded in 1209, Oxford University, again, hundreds and hundreds of years old. But how much is complacency, a risk for the UK as other cities around the world compete for the capital, for the talent, and how much urgency should government have in knitting this all together?
Could I actually just one point on apologies, I don't know your name, but the comment that you just made. I think one of the things, candidly, that I see or that I'm observing that I'm still struggling with is I think everyone, and Oxford certainly amongst them, we've got very high sustainability initiatives as well. We are looking at, we think about this as building out infrastructure as a service for biotech companies. We want to kind of make positive contributions to the local areas that we are investing in, and we want to kind of find ways to make these more attractive locations more generally, including from a sustainability perspective. But candidly, one of the things that I struggle with, and I continue to see, and to my point earlier, which is, well, you've got these local authorities who clearly say that they've got an agenda for ESG, then you bring in a historic listed building person who's got one view, you've got a leveling up person that's got another view, and I don't know, candidly, who makes the call on what of those, because you can't get all of the equations together sometimes, unfortunately, and sometimes you have to make a tough decision about what is the overarching goal that we are willing to compromise some things on in order to achieve that. And I think that's where I see local authorities still struggling, because they don't have a clear view as to what precedes what. And so they're still trying to balance everything, and they're getting a little bit lost in the way.
I'm very happy to keep going back and forth. Yeah, absolutely.
That too.
Quite simply, you have a central government that's another party. And the problem with this country is we're all about stabbing each other in the back instead of trying to collaborate, celebrate what is good about this country, and it's the most frustrating part of being British. And you're never, ever going to, I'm sorry to say, you'll never resolve it. Same way they can't resolve the same situations in America and everywhere else, that you have a political decision. Planning departments need to be taken out of the political arena and put into something that is a local run organisation that has no political affiliation, because that's the only time you'll get planning sorted.
I think that's true. I'll come back to my question earlier, but in a minute. But I think that's true. To answer your question, there have been quite a few projects put forward in London, innovative, green, much lower carbon footprint in the embodied carbon in these new projects, with the developers and promoters offering to, having driven down the carbon footprint, then offering to make them net zero, approved at mayoral level, and then they get called in by the Secretary of State. Thinking of Marks and Spencer on Oxford Street, ITV Studios on the South Bank. These kind of powers for the Secretary of State were intended, as far as we can see, to be used for third runways, nuclear power stations, good or bad, Olympics, etc. And now they're being used to just knock Sadiq for the hell of it. And so the uncertainty on the planning side is certainly putting off a lot of overseas capital. You look at the length of time to get these major projects through. I don't know if you have a similar view on the inertia.
Completely agree. And just to give you one example, we put in a planning permission in Scotland to change one louver on a building. I'm still waiting 12 months. Literally, the job will take 2 days to do, and I've had no response, barely anything. And I'm sure that's echoed around other projects we're looking at in Cambridge and Oxford. And it's not about pointing fingers, right? We all want the same thing here. We all want to make this better. I think we need to have some sort of clear strategy, and I actually think the private sector need to push this and lead it, and not rely on central government to make changes, because, exactly as the gentleman pointed out, there's a whole host of other things that they're trying to deal with. So why don't we pick up the agenda? Why don't we start doing something about it and giving government the answer that is hopefully not then politicised, because, yes, okay, we're private sector developers, and yes, we've got to make money, but actually money is not a bad thing, right? It's what you do with that money and how you work with that money, either that's ESG goals or others. So I think the private sector has a role to play here, and definitely picking up the agenda and leading the agenda and making sure that we can make some changes.
Yeah, I think, picking up on Mike's point earlier about sort of investing behind the potential of our sectors, when you think about, speed to market being critical from an infrastructure point of view because of the bottleneck, then we talk about planning, and it's such a constraint on the pace of development and the pace of the growth of the sector. And I think that's the frustration we all feel, is it's the bottleneck. But at the moment, you also see, severely constrained teams, which is why they take 12 months to be able to answer it. So it's not to put the blame on theirs, but the solution at some point exists in, changing the framework from within which decisions can be made, and also resourcing behind it. Because I would say, I feel very, sort of sorry for the teams on the ground who have a huge work volume to try and get through all the developers' kind of asks, at the same time as having to balance all of those broader kind of challenges. So, we talk at Breakthrough about day one science being the thing that drives our business. We're trying to deliver science earlier for those companies so that they can innovate, they can hire, and it is just a huge constraining factor to growing the sector. So, something that should be readily, solvable through investment, but at the same time, hamstrings us a little bit.
And Mike, just to the earlier question I had in terms of urgency, where do you see, which regions of the world and which clusters in particular do you see as the biggest threat to the UK if we are unable to get those magic ingredients working in the right way?
The names, the place I'll say won't surprise you. We just did an exercise actually to look at what the competing innovation ecosystems are around the world and see what lessons learned we can take from those ecosystems. And the UK, with the Cambridge Science Park and others were pioneers in actually commercializing innovation, did a fantastic job of that. Our trajectory has been really strong, still is really, really strong. If you go to Shenzhen, if you go to Tel Aviv, if you go to San Diego or most of the Bay Area, their trajectory, especially for the deep tech, R&D intensive innovations, their trajectory is just steeper than ours. And that is a recent phenomenon. And so we have a bit of a catching up to do, which is to increase our trajectory even further to be able to continue to win in this space. So we can't sit on our hands. We have to be really proactive about this. It would be a crying shame if we being the UK, come up with the next Genentech or the next Amgen, and we can't find a building for it, for example. That is just, let's hope we don't get there, because that would just be unbelievably sad.
Thank you. We have just a little over 7 minutes left. I know that the audience definitely doesn't seem shy, which is fantastic. If I could ask...
We've got a question over here.
Oh, there's a question? Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, David. I'm Alistair Lomax, and I'm director of the ARC Universities Group. And I'm really curious because there's been such an emphasis on Oxford and Cambridge. And Chas Bountra opened us today just to talk about how everyone has to work together. There are huge existential problems that we face. And we had Karen Holford also on a panel from the Open University, from Cranfield, and I've seen colleagues from the Open University here today. So my question is, what would it take from an investment perspective to consider investing in other universities and areas apart from Oxford and Cambridge? And by the way, there are 2 other universities in Oxford and Cambridge, and I don't think they get any attention from investors. I'm at Brookes and at Anglia Ruskin. Thank you.
I'm happy to take that, because we're probably the ones who are, at least of this group cohort, probably more shy around some of those, I'm going to call them secondary locations, but bear with me, apologies. For us, candidly, part of it is, given our scale, it's around how can we go in and get scale in a market where there's also not liquidity risk on top of it. So if I look at a market like a Glasgow, it's not on our agenda today because we worry about the depth of the liquidity for the Glasgow market more generally at this stage of its evolution. Now that might change. I think the other piece that we think about is also, and it's probably controversial to say, but we also want to be going deeper in the markets where we think you're going to have an outsized performance generally, and we are believers at the moment for, similar to what you saw in technology more generally, but urbanization is one of the trends where you're seeing outsized growth and performance from a life science real estate perspective because of, pharma companies are now decentralizing how they are innovating and getting new nodes of I'm going to say this, but kind of new technologies or new medical therapies, et cetera. They're outsourcing that, right, to startups. So where are you going to see the startups having the most growth and having, and therefore kind of generating more interest? So we just feel candidly that you're going to see enough demand and enough growth at an outsized pace in some of these larger markets because of that general urbanization trend. So that's probably, from our perspective, we would want to get more comfortable with that to kind of then go into a more secondary location.
And I guess to build on that, for Breakthrough, we take a science-first perspective, but we're a very new organization as well. So we closed our Fund 1 in April, and at the moment we've been investing in what you would describe as some prime locations, and as Abby's described, with kind of a weight of demand sitting behind them where you can take advantage of the supply-demand imbalance and take risk off the table. Supporting emerging markets, and if you describe it as secondary, emerging or nascent, we'll absolutely be looking at that, and we've been undertaking and investing in that in the US. And in Europe, we're just very young. We're only 7 months old in Europe, but we're looking at the Netherlands, we're looking in Germany, we're looking in France, and as I say, being led by the science, being led by the weight of the clustering, and being led by the market opportunities. In the UK, when you come back to that, as I say, previous Jersey, I think Manchester's had a phenomenal story over the last couple of decades, led by tech, and the life sciences has been coming right behind it. So there's some great market opportunities beyond the Golden Triangle. As Northern Gritstone was mentioned, if you look at Sheffield, Leeds, and Manchester, what they're doing, clubbing together, the quality of IP coming out of those organisations or universities and the quality of investment behind them now is very strong. So I think it's just a case of balancing kind of risk returns, and people will inevitably see them perhaps slightly later when someone else has been bolder and braver and taken a bit of risk off the market, and also when the weight of supply means, or the weight of liquidity, as Abby described, means that they're more viable to other investors. So it's just a case of timing and who's bold. James has been bold in Canary Wharf with his recent investment to try and make a life sciences campus there. So people will move into areas within markets or new markets, and they'll perhaps set a trail, putting risk on the table.
I think you're right, but I think if you look at one of Cadan's first purchases in the UK was in Glasgow. Our second was in Stevenage. These are not Oxford and Cambridge. We came to Oxford and Cambridge reasonably late. But why did it work in those two markets? Well, we had really supportive partners. And I don't mean partners from a money perspective. I just mean activators of the ecosystem who were there, who really wanted us to be there and didn't actually see us as big, bad real estate developer. You're going to come in and in 3 years' time, you're going to sell your building, so why should I bother building a relationship? And there are people who do that, right? And we're not those people on the stage. We're here for the long term. And finding those partners is really important. And sometimes they're public sector, sometimes they're private sector. Universities have a role to play. And actually, if you look across the kind of Cadan's portfolio, we're always happy going first, and we're always happy investing in those markets. Where we do that, we just need a partner who can help us navigate them, because they're not as obvious as an Oxford and a Cambridge that now has such scale that you've got agents like Bidwell's who can put out reports all the time telling you how much space there is. You try and ask an agent what's the demand in Glasgow, you just get a blank look. So you have to take that risk yourself. And when we're not talking hundreds of thousands of pounds risk, we're talking multi-million pound risk. You have to, as Abby and Tom were saying, you have to kind of weigh that up. So it's a kind of, that really supportive partner one. And it's a really fantastic example, which I like to use, which is Newcastle. So the biosphere in Newcastle is a fantastic kind of hybrid public-private project. It's really kind of catalysed that local market now. And the local council have done very well with it, and they're now, hopefully, later this year, going to try and find a private sector partner to continue the growth of that cluster. That's a really fantastic way of using local authorities to really catalyse the growth of somewhere, and then at a certain point, it is only right the private sector step in and take up the slack and help those businesses grow. So there are ways that you can do this, and there are ways that we as investors can help support that. It doesn't always have to be money in the first instance. We can help with design, we can help with underwriting, we can help with pitching the business model, whatever it is. We're not necessarily always there to go, no, I've got to make X% IRR and everything else I don't care about. We're here to help, and so why don't the public sector try and use us as much as possible?
Thank you. We are technically out of time, but if I could ask the panel for perhaps a 1 or 2 or 3 word answer. I wanted to sneak in one more question. There was someone at the front. Just wanted. You could ask it.
We can hear you.
I was kind of just going to build on that. So, you mentioned a few universities. They're all in Milton Keynes, right? Cranfield, Open University. And we've actually got the new Milton Keynes University, MKU. And we've just got our city ship. Woohoo! Do you think that's going to help getting some investment in there, in Milton Keynes, right bang in the middle of the arc?
So my 3 or 5 word answer would be, will Department of Levelling Up still support the ARC? Because I think if the ARC is not supported, Milton Keynes might be technically in the middle of Oxford and Cambridge, but without government investment, I think it's going to be tough. But if the government is serious about the ARC, I'd be very positive about Milton Keynes. I don't know if...
I guess I'll be more hopeful. Talent drives, business formation and business clustering. If there's an abundance of talent, there'll be an abundance of business if you can make it an attractive place for them to live and work. So it sounds more hopeful, the fact that you're getting more academic investment. Way longer than 5 words, sorry. I'd
say find a niche. Don't try and be all things to everybody. And there's one of the reasons that Stevenage is so successful is their focus on cell and gene therapy. Find a niche that sets you apart from everybody else and the money will follow.
But that came with government support.
Yeah. And Mike, unfortunately, you can't invest in Milton Keynes because you can only invest in companies coming out of Cambridge.
It's not a two-word answer, but to both of these questions, you need to think about an innovation ecosystem like a human cell, right? Which is made up of all sorts of components. You've got the nucleus, you've got the mitochondria, you've got all these different aspects in this format. And it takes a long time, it took evolution a long time to create a cell, a complex cell like we know it right now. And it happens that Oxford and Cambridge have the benefit of time that these cells exist. And so these cells, these innovation ecosystems are quite unique and quite rare, and we should continue to back them. We have to continue to back them. That's not to say that there are not other areas in the UK that have phenomenal science, right? World-leading science and great innovation, and you can see the hints of cell formation starting to take place right there. That will take time, and so we have to continue to back our existing cells, while at the same time exploring where we can have new cells and let that evolution take place. But it will take time. We have to manage our expectations. It doesn't happen overnight, and we should be patient. We should absolutely get behind these other areas.
Thank you. So thank you very much, Mike, Tom, Abby, James, and everybody else. Thank you very much.